All right. Hey, everybody. It's Nathaniel Avila reporting from Dallas County, and I'm here with Ruby Rodriguez, also reporting from Dallas County. How are you?
I am well, thank you very much. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing the
Ready?
goods. We're going to be talking about the history.
The history.
Yeah. All right. So, Ruby, you said you wanted to start us off with the Porifriato.
Yeah, so why don't you just basically go over where we left off the last time?
All right. So, when we last left our heroes, um, let me see, the Gilded Age just ended. So, and this is basically when, let me see, where The Squatter and the Dawn was published uh, by Maria Ruiz de Barton, where they finally started to like say like we need equal rights and everything. Uh, and then we also have migration into the United States, which was became complicated by racial restrictions at this time. The Chinese Exclusion Act was implemented in 1882. Let me see. And let me see. Oh, the Southern Pacific Railway came in. El Paso became a boom city. And then that was pretty much it after the Gilded Age.
And the setup of the U.S. Border Patrol.
Oh yeah, the U.S. Boulder Patrol was set up in order. Well, it was started off as the Chinese Inspection Force,
Hmm.
um, but then it became the U.S. Border Patrol because they wanted to just find out Chinese Mexicans so they can deport them back into Mexico.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Which is so weird if you think about it. If someone's Chinese and they've never been to Mexico, you're gonna just deport them to Mexico.
Well,
Like,
I think they'll only deport them to Mexico if they have Mexican citizenship.
I know, but think about it like maybe it's one of those situations where, their parents were from there, right? But
Mm,
they've never actually been there. And like they're just gonna all of a sudden be deported to some foreign land that they've never
mm.
been to,
That's a real,
regardless.
it's a real DACA situation.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so that's where we left off last time. And again, Nate is giving the perspective of the Mexicans who are in America at
USA,
that time.
USA.
But I have some information that'll let you know why there was so much migration from Mexico into the United States to begin with.
Right.
Because we're starting off with the 1890s with Nate. So I'm just going to give a brief overview of what's going on in Mexico during that time. So we have from like 1877 to 1911. That long period of time, there's only one guy in charge, and he's basically a dictator. It was Porfirio Diaz. He served all those years except for like this one 4 year stretch that lasted from 1880 to 1884. But other than that, he had been in charge this whole time and he was ruling as a dictator. So during that time, he started basically commercializing Mexico. He encouraged foreign investment in the country. And so Mexico undergoes like a big, tremendous like commercial and economic development because of that. By 1910, most of the businesses over there in Mexico are owned by either America or Britain. And so this largely benefits the country's upper classes, but not its poor majority, sorry, not its poor majority, which kind of sounds familiar. Think about
I don't get it.
it. Where we have businesses here where they're for the upper classes,
Oh
not
yeah,
its poor majority.
yeah, because the upper class got the money.
Right. So this inequality in Mexico's political and economic system eventually lead to the revolution. So there's
Right.
like a whole revolution that starts going on because people are fed up with the inequality. The first one leading the revolution is Francisco Madero.
Hmm?
He's the one to lead it, but there's so many things that happen, during this time. There's so much fighting and violence. finally Diaz is forced to step down and Madero is elected president. But even after Madero's elected president, there's still so much conflict and violence that continues throughout the next decade over there. And this causes leaders such as Emiliano Zapata in the south and Pancho Villa in the north to rise up. And these are leaders that are like actually in defense of the peasant and working class. So that's why they gain so much popularity. It's because, like we just mentioned, the poor was the majority in Mexico. Yeah, so I was saying that basically throughout until, let's see, so from like 1911 all the way up until 1917.
Yeah.
We have like several leaders that take over. So first it's Madero, and then he gets betrayed by Huerta, who was like his own general of the army. So he used the army against him. Like he used his own army against him, basically, Huerta did. And killed off Madero. So then he came into power, Huerta did, and he led another dictator rule, you know.
Yeah.
They were all about like power, right? So throughout this time, several people get thrown out of, you know, the power seat. And so this is a struggle. And meanwhile, while this fighting and violence is going on, you know, the people are just having to deal with it, and they're really scared, and this is what leads over 900,000 Mexicans to emigrate over to the United States. So from basically 1910 to 1919, you have over 900,000 Mexicans who fled to the United States due to all the fighting and the violence over there. After that, after 1919, basically the one left in charge is Obregón. After the revolution, after 10 years of a revolution, Obregón is left with the task of reforming Mexico.
Right.
And that's where I'll stop, and then you can continue to what is going on in the U.S.
Gotcha. During that time, we're going to move on to what is known as the rise of Juan Crow. You ready? So, in the 1880s, if the 1880s represented a period of massive cultural and economic change for Mexican Americans in the U.S. Southwest, the 1890s were marked by renewed racial conflict and social unrest. In El Paso, which experienced a massive influx of white immigrants to the region after the completion of the Southern Pacific Railway line, there was a widespread entrenchment of racial animosity. So, interracial marriage, which had therefore been tactfully allowed in some parts of Texas, became a crime, increasingly targeted by Mexican officials. Can you imagine that?
Yeah, I can.
Wow. So,
and this is all due to the fact that we had white Americans moving into El Paso. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
So they came in and started changing things just because they said so.
Pretty much. So throughout the state, a new code of racial relations and series of ordinances worked to create segregated racial neighborhoods. So these laws targeted Native Americans, African Americans, Asians, Mexican Americans. So they have been described as Juan Crow, the rough equivalent to the Jim Crow laws emerging in the South. So in El Paso, Mexican Americans were demonized as ignorant, and therefore both ineligible and unworthy of the vote.
Ignorant? Why? Just because they spoke a different language?
Mm-hmm. And they look different from us.
So bad. Yeah. Bad, because you're different.
They're not like you and me, therefore they must be evil. Savages, savages. Remember that song?
Where's that from?
It's from Pocahontas.
Ah, no, I don't remember.
Yeah, I wonder if they even bleed. So, what? It's a good song. They're not like you and me, therefore they must be evil. Savages, savages. White Texans also frequently characterize them as foreigners, despite their U.S. citizenship. So,
But they would never call themselves foreigners, huh?
no.
What were you? Like, what? Oh my God.
I'm American, okay?
Yeah.
I'm from America.
So your family didn't come on a ship over here. You were just already here.
I told you to never tell anyone.
No.
So, one El Paso newspaper claimed Mexicans were foreigners who claim American citizenship, but who are ignorant of things American as the mule. So, in the 1890s, the railroad and mining industries continued to expand. So, these industries needed massive pools of labor to fill new jobs, many of which were filled by immigrants from Mexico. So, immigrants entering to the United States came from remote regions of Mexico seeking relief from the increasingly brutal porfiriato, like what Ruby was saying.
Porfirio Diaz.
So, the Texas-Mexican Railway had connected the U.S. and Mexico in 1883, and this railroad continued for an increasingly integrated transnational transportation system between the two countries. Meanwhile, for elite Mexican-American families who continue to undergo litigation involving disputed land claims, the federal government finally offered them some relief in 1891. So the Court of Private Land Claims was created to settle disputes, providing a federally funded interpreter for the court. So the New Mexico Territory, which had been urging such a commission for years, fell under the jurisdiction of the court, along with Colorado and Arizona. And though the court did confirm some Nuevo Mexicano land grants, many were left unconfirmed. So, yeah. So, in Texas, the massive economic and political inequalities occurring sparked a resurgence of racial warfare. In September 1891, Catarino Erasmo Garza led an army of hundreds of Tejanos back and forth across the Rio Grande in a revolt against both Mexico and the United States, known as the Garza Revolution. So,
Right. I also forgot to mention that there were times that the U.S. would get involved while the revolution was going on in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
The U.S. feared their unruly neighbor. You know, they were kind of like, hey, Mexico's going crazy over there. You know, shouldn't we intervene some way, somehow? So they would actually, like, go over there.
Yeah, and then Canada.
And that would only increase tensions, make things worse, not better.
Exactly. So, adopting the slogan Libres Fronterizos, which were stitched into their hats, the army known as the Garzistas was a multi-class movement consisting of lower middle-class professionals, poor farmers, landless ranchers, and wealthy landowners, with both Mexicans and Mexican Americans, as well as a few Anglo-Americans who married into Mexican families. So the military response to the Garza revolutions was extremely bloody and set precedents for both Texas police as well as U.S. Army for domestic warfare. Leading the suppression of the U.S. Army Captain John Gregory Burke, who said, "The cheapest thing to do is to shoot them down wherever they are, found skulking about with their arms in their hands, and to burn down some of the ranchos which gave them shelter." What do you think about that?
That's that good old American way again.
So Burke,
we'll just use brute force.
That's how you do it.
Not care, because you are not tough if you have feelings.
So Burke, who had 15 years experience in Arizona during the Apache Wars, led his armies to destroy all Tejano communities believed to support Garza. So the U.S. Army burned down ranches, threatened families with lynching, searched without warrants, and stole guns, horses, and money from Tejano families. And then they're all like, "They're taking our guns," while they actually did take guns.
Yeah, y'all took our guns a long time ago. And what happened?
Yeah, this happened. So,
Mm,
so complaints were filled with state and federal officials, but the atrocities were ignored. The Garza Revolution was suppressed by 1893, at which point Catarino Garza was forced into exile along with the last of his scattered supporters. So, new story, same ending.
right. You notice that some of the things they do, they're afraid to happen to them.
Mm-hmm. That's their biggest reason why, because they don't want to become the minority.
Yeah, but it's all fine and well when they do it to the minority.
Yeah.
It's just like, how do you live with that logic?
I don't know, man.
I don't know.
So in New Mexico, there was also significant ethnic violence in the 1890s. It began in the Santa Fe Ring. When the Santa Fe Ring, a group of powerful Anglo lawyers and land speculators, succeeding in dispositioning thousands of Mexican Americans of lands they used for community farming. So the ring moved quickly to fence the lands to prevent anyone from accessing the areas. In response, a group called Las Goras Blancas initiated a lawsuit against the ring, arguing for community access to the Las Vegas land grant, but the judge sided with the Santa Fe ring. So the Goras Blancas, outraged at the injustice, promised military retribution. In 1890, they began their campaign of vigilante justice, cutting down new fences, destroying farm equipment, and burning buildings throughout San Miguel, Santa Fe, and Mora counties. Believed to have been led by three Herrera brothers, Juan Jose, known as El Capitan, Pablo and Nicanor. Nicanor. The Goras Blancas held between 700 and 1,500 members at its height. In 1890, the Blancas declared themselves the defenders of the rights of all people in general, and especially the rights of poor people. The territorial governor, LeBaron Bradford Prince, responded by declaring them a violent mob and organized officials to clamp down the group. 4 dozen Goras Blancas were indicted, but none were convicted. Finally, in Arizona, racial violence also erupted in 1896 with the Yaqui uprising, when a group of Yaqui, Pima, and Mexican revolutionaries fought against the U.S. and Mexican armies in an early attempt to overthrow the increasingly despotic president Porfirio Diaz. So, what are you thinking about that whole thing?
I'm thinking that what I just said earlier, there was a lot of involvement when it came to trying to dethrone Porfirio.
Mm-hmm. But what about that whole thing with the Goras Blancas?
Oh, so the Goras Blancas is crazy because when you mentioned that, like, I automatically thought white hoods, the white hoods.
Uh-huh.
It's very similar to the KKK.
But they're the good guys, though.
But they're the right. So that's what I'm saying. Like, it's crazy how they actually did good, and they were the white hoods, and then you have the KKK who also call themselves the white hoods, and then they're just like bad.
Yeah, this was.
It's crazy that both exist, you know.
Yeah, and I think this was before the KKK. I think at this point in time,
obviously.
Yeah. So in the first decade of the 12th century, oh yeah, we're done with the 18. Now we're into the 1900s. So in the first decade of the 20th century, the population of Mexicans in the United States grew significantly. The first railroad connecting Mexico City to the Mexico-United States border was completed, which allowed for greater ease of movement from the interior of Mexico to the United States. Migration increased, especially after a severe recession hit Mexico in 1906, and then a depression from 1908 to 1909. These migrants were met with animosity in in the United States as Anglo-Americans in the Southwest began warning about the dangers of non-white migration. As the number of the Mexican immigrants increased, nativist broadsides emerged with the Progressive Era, which asserted the poor living conditions of the immigrants, such as substandard housing, High infant mortality, lack of sanitation, and high crime rates were indicative of flaws within the Mexican character, rather than a failure on the part of the United States to assist the immigrants. So what are you thinking about that?
I think that's something that they still do today. They blame, they make the people put the blame on something else rather than the actual people who could do something about it, or should be doing something about it.
Yeah. And Chihuahua, Texas, complaints about the hordes of Mexicans pouring over the border were widespread. However, the need for Mexican traquero labor, farm workers, and miners meant that enforcement against Mexican laborers remained lax. So, for U.S.-born Mexican Americans, the first decade of the 20th century was defined largely by logistic discrimination, including the creation of segregated schools for Mexican American children, where they were severely underserved and mistreated. You don't like that part?
Sounds like the same old story.
So mysterious and unexplained jail suicides and a significant number of lynchings. So some Mexican Americans, however, took a stand against these violent conditions. In 1903, near Oxnard, California, a group of Mexican American beet farm workers teamed up with their Japanese American co-workers to demand better wages and working conditions. The Oxnard strike of 1903 is one of the first recorded instances of an organized strike by Mexican Americans in United States history. And we were doing it with our Japanese brothers. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
we gotta come together.
So the Mexican and Japanese American strikers raised the ire of surrounding white community. While picketing, one laborer, Luis Vasquez, was shot and killed, and 4 others were wounded. While the strikers were able to leverage the press from the shooting into securing some of their demands, the success of the strike proved short-lived after Samuel Gompers and the American Federation of Labor refused to grant the strikers an official union charter due to the racial makeup of the group. So,
it's not right.
So the American Federation of Labor refused to give an actual, allow them to unionize because of their race.
Because they were Japanese and they were
Mexicans. So imagine doing that just purely on race alone.
Be like, you could work here for us for what we want to pay you, but that's about it.
You can make us money.
You can continue to work for us, but that's about it.
Yeah, you can make us money. So the incidents of racial conflict also flared up in areas such as Clifton, Arizona, where in 1904 mobs of Anglo men raided the homes of Mexican American families to kidnap their children, as to save their children from the suffering of being raised in Mexican homes. What?
What?
It's kind of messed up.
Are you sure you read that right?
Yeah, I read this right.
Oh my god. That makes no sense.
I'm
gonna save you your suffering by just ending your life and causing you more suffering.
Yeah. Well, they didn't kill the kids. They kidnapped them. They took them away.
Oh, they kidnapped them.
Yeah.
I thought you meant that they kidnapped them and killed them.
Nah.
Because they wanted to save them from suffering. So where would they take them then? Would they take them to give them a better life?
I guess. Because they
I need some follow-up data on that.
You can. This is from the.
What would they do with the kidnapped kids?
I don't know. This is cited from a book called The Great Arizona Orphan Abduction by Linda Gordan. So if you want more information on that, you can read.
Link that in the bio for sure.
So in 1906, the Supreme Court refused to hear what became known as the Arizona Orphan Abduction case, thereby tactfully allowing the children to be legally adopted and raised by their kidnappers. So that's what happened.
Okay.
Why? You have nothing else to say?
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Like, I feel like it's very bad because you took someone's kid away from them,
Mm-hmm.
like
And
unwillingly. That person did not willingly give away their kids, I'm
yeah,
sure.
yeah, and then the Supreme Court, uh,
Just allowed it to happen.
yeah, just said, "Up, that's what happens," and then they allow them
Yeah,
to be
like
raised.
I don't know. I don't know because I don't know if those kids actually did get a better life or not. What if their motives, were something else and those kids ended up being sexually abused or abused, period.
No, the only reason why they kidnapped them was because they didn't want them to be raised by Mexicans.
That's what I'm saying though.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they said.
Yeah.
But how do you know that was actually their motive? If you're already doing something bad enough to kidnap someone's child, do you really think you're gonna have the best intentions?
I don't know,
I don't
man.
know. I
You
don't
gotta
know.
read the book. You gotta read the book. So, in these years around the turn of the century, Mexico intensified its campaign against the Yaqui of Sonora, who were fighting against the forced assimilation programs of the Porfirio government. So, the federal Mexican government initiated a program of forced resettlement, deporting Yaqui rebels to work as slave laborers in the Henequin plantation in the Yucatan. So, in response, many Mexican Yaquis fled to the United States. The U.S. Army, led by Captain Henry C. Willard, negotiated with the Mexican government to deport any Yaqui. So deport any Yaqui found in Arizona back to Mexico. So the U.S. Department of Commerce and Labor went a step further and ordered the detention and deportation of all Yaquis who entered the United States without documentation. Somewhere between 10,000 and 15,000 Yaquis were deported to Mexico, where they met with murder, lynching, and enslavement by the Porfiriato.
Like I said, he was a dictator, so yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now I'm going to show another photo of said lynching. It's a bit
Trigger warning.
It's a bit graphic, but it is important to look at these types of things. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. Are you super ready?
As ready as it can be.
So.
Wow, that is a lot of people. What the heck? It looks like they would just leave them there.
Mm-hmm. So what it...
Because their bones, you could see their bones, like if they've been up there for a while.
Yeah. So how does this make you feel, Ruby?
It makes me feel sad.
Okay. So, can you explain what the picture is?
So it says right here, Yaqui men lynched by the Porfiriato. I guess that was the name of his reign.
Yeah.
Porfirio.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what we're looking at there. So basically, just because they were rebelling against him.
Okay. And how many are being lynched right now?
That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 people hanging from the tree. 5 of them, and all 5 of them look as if they've been up there for a while. Their clothes is all tattered and torn, and their bones are showing, and their legs and their faces, their skulls. Looks like a picture straight out of a horror book.
Right.
Basically, horror story.
All right. Let's move on from that.
It kind of reminded me of the drawings that they make in that book, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark.
It does kind of look like that just based on the photograph.
Mm-hmm. That's what it reminded me of.
Mm-hmm. So, in the latter half of the decade, the U.S. immigration officials worked to step up regulations at the Mexico-United States border, as immigration from Mexico to the United States increased around the turn of the century. Nativists pushed the increased public health and public charge restriction against potential migrants and Mexicans of Chinese descent. U.S. immigration officials became increasingly concerned about Chinese Mexicans who entered the United States by wearing traditional Mexican clothes and speaking Spanish. I mean, you think that they'll sneak by if they wear different clothes?
Maybe, I'm not sure.
So in 1905, F.T. Schmucker, chief of the Immigration Bureau in El Paso, asserted that between 150 and 200 Chinese Mexicans were being held in detention in Juarez. By 1907, U.S. immigration officials adopted even more stringent policies in order to prevent Chinese Mexicans into entering the United States. However, one immigration inspector named Marcus Braun wrote how exceedingly difficult it is to positively state whether these are Chinamen or Mexicans. So, in the lead up for the Mexican Revolution, the number of immigrants entering the U.S. from Mexico increased drastically, including the number of Chinese Mexicans. In 1909, the El Paso Times wrote, "There are hundreds of celestials where there was one 20 years before. Every train brings a dozen or two to Juarez, all intent on getting across the border, and in the course of a few years, hundreds of them have been taken off trains in the American side." So yeah.
What did they mean by celestials?
I have no idea.
Yeah, you lost me there.
Celestials is in quotation marks. I just looked it up. It just gave me a Marvel thing. So yeah.
Maybe that's just something that they used to say.
Maybe.
Call them back then. I don't know.
Yeah. So I'm going to show you a picture of a Chinese Mexican.
Aliens, maybe? They meant aliens?
And might be what they meant.
Okay. That's the only thing I can think of that would make sense.
So here's a picture of Ju Sing, who is Mexican Chinese, or Chinese Mexican, who was one of the many people who was deported for that. So here's a photo of one of these people, one of these folks.
Well, I mean, wouldn't the name pretty much give it away, though, I guess, in this case?
Oh, yeah. I don't think they were really trying to hide. Were they trying to hide? Yeah. I'm not sure.
I mean, I don't know. I thought you said they were trying to disguise themselves.
No, I said that that the Americans were, like, afraid that they were going to try to do that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't look like they are trying. Yeah.
I mean, it would make sense they would speak Spanish and dress like Mexicans because they're from Mexico. Right. Yeah. So I wouldn't think that would be so outside the realm of possibility. So yeah. So, okay, so the 1900s ended. We're done with the 1900s, and now we're going to move into the next chapter, the 1910s. And we're going to start with the Mexican Revolution.
So, which I was basically giving an overview of earlier.
So the Mexican Revolution resulted from the increasing unpopularity of the 31-year-long brutal dictatorship of Porfirio Diaz. Growing resistance to Diaz resulted in a power struggle among competing elites, which created the opportunity for agrarian insurrection. So wealthy landowner Francisco I. Madero challenged Diaz in the 1910 presidential election. Following the rigged results, revolted under the plan of San Luis Potosi. So armed conflict broke out in northern Mexico, led by Madero, Pascual Orozco, and Pancho Villa, and with support from portions of the middle class and peasantry and organized labor. Diaz was forced out. Yay! He is out. So, in the Treaty of Ciudad Juarez, Diaz resigned and went into exile. New elections were held in 1911, and Madero was elected, taking office in November. Opposition to his regime then grew from both the conservatives who saw him as too weak and from former revolutionary fighters who saw him as too conservative. That's politics for you.
That even though the 30 plus years of Diaz's reign was over with and Madero came in to be the elected president, there was still so many power struggles that happened there because, like you said right now, some people thought he was too conservative, other people thought he wasn't. So there was basically like a lot of elites, that had the money, I guess, to control armies and stuff like that, who would constantly take over. I think there was like 2 or 3 leaders that, they went through
right
in that short period of time.
Yeah. So in a period in February 1913, known as the 10 Tragic Days, Madero and his vice president, Pino Suarez, were forced to resign and then assassinated. So to counter the counter-revolutionary regime of General Victoriano Huerta came to power backed by the United States and its ambassador, Henry Lane Wilson. So businesses, interests, and supporters of the old order, Huerta remained in power until July 1914. So when he was forced out by a coalition of different regional revolutionary forces, including the forces of Pancho Villa and Emiliano
Zapata.
Emiliano Zapata, wealthy landowner Venustiano Carranza formed the Constitutionalist political faction, and with military forces under the leadership of Alvaro Obregón, played an important part in defeating Huerta. When the revolutionaries' attempt to reach political agreement failed, Mexico plunged into a civil war. Carranza emerged as the victor in 1915, defeating the Villistas and forcing Zapata back to guerrilla warfare. Zapata was assassinated in 1919 by agents of President Carranza.
Yep.
Many scholars consider the promulgation of the Mexican Constitution in 1917 as the endpoint of the armed conflict. So, yeah, a lot of things going down.
But that wasn't the end of it. It was not the end of it. It was until after Carranza was taken over by Obregón.
Yeah. So right now, Mexico is going through leader after leader after leader. So, as for the United States, the revolutionary proved profoundly consequential, as the violence unleashed by the conflict led between 600,000 and 1 million refugees to flee to the United States. Along the border, residents in American cities feared revolutionary fervor for land redistribution and would inspire the poor and working classes in the U.S. to rise up against Anglo property ownership and domination. And we don't want none of that. We want to keep in power. Right, Ruby?
We don't want none of that, but we'll surely do it to them first.
Yeah.
But you can't do it back to us.
Yeah, because it's my right. So, the Texas governor made formal requests for U.S. troops to guard the border and keep revolutionary ideals out of the United States. Revolution has no place in America. So, the border was effectively turned into a militarized zone. Barbed wire, spotlights, tanks, machine guns, and airplanes were brought in to surveil Mexican residents and to maintain order in the borderlands. Around 6,500 U.S. troops were stationed in El Paso, where they were ordered to keep Villistas from entering the city and keep watch over their Mexican refugees and Mexican Americans in the city. U.S. Consular Agent George Carruthers wrote, "A large portion of the Mexican population of El Paso have arms, which will create a dangerous situation here. The possibility exists of them starting something serious." So the Second Amendment does not apply to them. It only applies to us because we're awesome. You're muted.
Sorry. I'm telling you, this logic is just it makes no sense.
There's a lot of hypocrisy going on here, I'm noticing.
Yes, there's a lot of double standards and hypocrisy.
There's a lot of we can keep our guns, but they have guns. That means they're dangerous.
Right.
Yeah.
Not us, not the ones that came over and slaughtered the Native Americans and took over whatever land we wanted. Not
Right.
us.
Exactly. So in January 1916, while Americans took matters into their hands and started a race riot in the majority Mexican neighborhood of Chihuahua, attacking every Mexican refugee and Mexican American they found in the streets. Why? Because they just want to.
Because they feared that they were going to do it first.
Mm-hmm.
And out of fear, they did what they did.
Right.
That's ugly.
Mm-hmm. So while Mexican American historians have continued to debate the long-term consequences of the Mexican Revolution, one of its most long-lasting legacies was the mass dislocation of entire communities from Mexico to the United States. Men, women, and children fled on foot, traveled by wagon and horseback, and by railroad to enter the United States as refugees. In the aftermath of the Pancho Villa expedition, one press report described the hundreds of refugees fleeing the United States in the course of a single day. Following the troops were hundreds of refugees, prosperous Mormon family. What Mormons? Prosperous Mormon families rode in comfortable farm wagons or in small motor cars. Some Mexicans rode in carriages on horses, mules, burros, and other motor lorries of the expeditionary forces, while hundreds of them and Chinese residents from the evacuated region walked through the deep dust which had been made by the feet of hundreds of troops. So yeah. Not into it?
They forced them to do all that.
Mm-hmm. Why don't they just come here legally? It's super easy. All you gotta do is, one, be born here. That's it. Yeah. So life in the United States was difficult and violent for Mexican refugees and Mexican Americans in the latter half of the Progressive Era. So reformers in the era believed that non-white people were primitive and biologically inferior.
Yeah.
So the eugenics influence.
That's just what they said to give themselves an excuse to be ugly.
Mm-hmm. So the eugenics influence, the Dinningham Commission argued for drastic reductions in the number of immigrants to the United States. While academics such as Charles Davenport claimed racial defiancies were the root of violence and poverty. So this elite nativism had direct translation on the ground, as refugees of the Mexican Revolution were regularly denied humanitarian aid. In one incident in 1914, refugees fleeing the violence of the revolution crossed into West Texas. In response, white Texans arrested the refugees and imprisoned them in Fort Bliss. You not into it?
I mean, at this point, wasn't seeking asylum legal?
I don't know, man. It doesn't sound like it. I think it was mostly done by citizens, not just by like citizens being vigilantes.
They just all took matters into their own hands. It was like the Wild Wild West.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. So most of the hundreds of thousands of Mexican refugees who fled to the United States during the Revolution settled in California and the U.S. Southwest. In Los Angeles, many of the resettled refugees lived in historically Mexican-American area of East L.A. State and local resources were thinly spread, and Mexican refugees and Mexican Americans were specifically targeted for exclusion from welfare programs. So they were denied welfare.
And this is where in the East LA, the Cholo was born.
Mm-hmm.
The Cholo and the Chola.
Mm-hmm. You have that picture of you as a Chola.
You what?
You still have that photo of you as a Chola.
I know, I love that photo.
It's a good photo. You look like you're gonna do some Chola things. I don't know.
The thing is I didn't know, but I fit that character so well. I just do. It's typecasting. What am I gonna say?
Oh yeah. So Mexicans were left to fill pre-existing gaps in the American labor market and colonias or Mexican majority neighborhoods were established in Chicago, Kansas City, and Salt Lake City, as railroad companies were one of the main sources of employment. So they don't like us, but they'll take our work. So
Yeah, they don't like us, but they'll let us make them money.
So the steel and automobile sectors drew Mexicans and Mexican Americans to Detroit, San Francisco, and Minneapolis, as well as farming in Oregon, Texas, and Southern California. In order to provide middle-class Mexicans with sense of grounding in their new communities, consulates of the Mexican government in major cities organized a network of patriotic councils and honorary committees to celebrate Mexican national holidays and to express support for the revolution. So the Juntas Patrioticas proved incredibly popular and were in the early form of community organizing for the Mexican community in the United States. So something's going on. That's pretty good.
That's a pretty good, yeah. One good. Someone actually doing something good.
Yeah. So Mexican Americans were faced a darker form of discrimination during the Progressive Era. In this period, several dozen states passed eugenics laws outlining legal criteria for compulsory sterilization. So in California, eugenicists and at public institutions like Sonoma State Hospital and Whittier State School began their sterilization programs in the 1910s. These doctors believed that dispositions for poverty, crime, mental illness, disability, and violence were inheritable, and thus anyone diagnosed as insane, feeble-minded, or epileptic was unfit for breeding.
That sounds very Hitler-ish.
Oh, yeah. So what do you think about these people just like deciding what people should do with their bodies and just forcibly sterilize them just because they don't think, just because of something that they can't control?
It sounds like something very similar that's going on today with Abbott and these ridiculous abortion laws that he's putting into place, or trying to put into place.
But you're murdering babies.
They're not murdering babies.
Oh. So you're saying a fetus is not a baby?
Fetus is a fetus. It's actually a zygote and then a fetus.
Okay.
And then when it's outside of the womb, it's a baby. The thing is like, I wouldn't have so much of a problem with you saying that you are off for saving lives and saving babies and stuff like that, because to you, they're murdering babies or whatever. And it's really not about that. To begin with, like, just because you're pro-choice doesn't mean that you're pro-abortion. It means that you're pro a person being able to dictate what goes on in their life. Mm-hmm. Because you wouldn't want somebody dictating your life.
Oh, yeah.
Basically.
Like if a person were to choose not to have an abortion, that would be cool.
I mean, I'm just saying, like, you don't get to you don't get to tell people, if specifically if you're all about, oh, this country is free and you're free to do stuff whatever you want and no one tells you what to do. No, that's not true, because you're trying to tell women what to do with their bodies. And like I said, I wouldn't have a problem with it if they weren't so anti helping when you do have said baby, you know? Mm-hmm. Like, you're already forcing us to live in this kind of society where we're supposed to be okay with whatever crumbs you give us. Mm. And then on top of that, you want to force us to have babies. That's just going to lessen the amount of crumbs that we get to begin with. Like, mm-hmm. You know, it just doesn't make any sense to me, but whatever.
What I noticed is that the term pro-life only applies to this particular situation.
Situation. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So they would thus be permanently sterilized in order to solve the nation's social ills. So recommendations for surgical sterilization were heavily influenced by eugenic prejudices regarding the biological inadequacy of poor and non-white people. So that's no bueno. So, as a result, Mexican-American men, women, and children were disproportionately sterilized in California. By some estimates, Mexican-Americans were between 40 and 60% more likely to be permanently sterilized than their white counterparts.
Well, You know why they did that?
Why?
They don't want us to be the majority, like you said.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
They're
yeah.
afraid. They're afraid. Why are they so afraid?
Yeah, because they very much don't want to be the minority. They really fear about about becoming the minority because
I
they're
know.
afraid that the oppressors would then become that the oppressed would then become the oppressors, and then
Oh,
they
you
would have to do
mean
that.
do to y'all what y'all did to us?
Yeah, that's what they're
Is that what
afraid
you
of.
mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I have news for everyone that thinks that
What is it?
we're not bad people.
You telling
We're
me?
we're not we're not gonna do what you did to us
Mm-hmm.
because we know what you did to us was very bad and very evil, and
Mm-hmm.
we're not like that.
Yeah, we are not them.
We're not them. We're
Mm-hmm.
not gonna do what you did because two wrongs don't make a right.
Mm-hmm. But two rights do make a left. That was from a Fairly Hot Parents.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was one of the only jokes I remember. So, the progressive era elites also passed severe was it? Mis miscegenation laws. Miscegenation laws. Okay, so progressive era elites also passed severe miscegenation laws, as well as laws prohibiting normal individuals from marrying people with low IQs in order to breed a more healthy nation. So California's eugenic laws were the basis for Nazi eugenics.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was about to say.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds very similar to
Yeah.
Hitler's reign.
So if you want to know where the Nazis got that idea, they got it actually from us, from America. And the sources for that is SF Gate, The Eugenics and the Nazis by Edwin Black, and The Nazi Connection by Stefan Kuhl. Um, so those are
Link
the
those
sources.
in the bio.
Mm-hmm. So moving on after that, we're gonna move on to what is known as La Matanza. So in the mid 1910s, proved to be one of the most violent periods for Mexican Americans in Texan history. In the summer of 1915, a manifesto attributed to the Mexican seditionists were discovered. Were discovered entitled El Plan de San Diego. The plan sought to overthrow white control over the entire borderlands through a pan-ethnic liberating army of race and people, which would include Mexicans and Mexican Americans, African Americans, and Japanese Americans. So the plan called for the expulsion of Anglos and the execution of all white men over the age of 16.
Oh my god.
It's a bit drastic. So,
I think at this point in time they were like, we've had it.
mm-hmm. So the plan also called for burning bridges and derailing trains in order to disrupt federal, state, and local infrastructure. So the initial steps of the plan were initiated through targeted attacks against prominent ranches. On August 8th, 1915, around 60 ethnic men raided the Las Norias headquarters of the Texas Rangers on the King Ranch. In response to this raid and the discovery of the plan was swift and violent, the Texas Rangers launched the indiscriminate manhunt, killing every Mexican and Mexican American man they could find. Doesn't matter if they were just passing by, they were dead. So, one ranger wrote that the troops showed a savage racial element against the Mexicans. Estimates range from at least 102 people killed in the wake of the first incident. So they killed 102 people. You don't think that's cool?
I don't think either. I don't think that's cool. I just feel like all of this happened, it's like all cause and effect. I mean, if you're going to be oppressing people, they're going to rebel. That's just an effect,
Mm-hmm.
So then they're going to get mad that they're trying to rebel against them. They're going to try to take control again, and they're just going to lash out and do something illogical, hurtful, and I just don't like it. It's
Right.
just like a circle.
Yeah. So this event set off a wave of violence across South Texas, described by some as an orgy of bloodshed, known as the Hour of Blood. So, and it's also part of a broader period called La Matanza. So, Texas Judge James Wells estimated that in Hidalgo County and Cameron County alone, Texas officers and vigilantes executed between 250 and 300 men between the summers of 1915 and 1916. So,
And who was it that was doing the executing?
it was the Anglo Americans. It was the Texas officers and vigilantes.
Okay. Because I'm trying to see if there's a connection to the like police that they used to use as policing back then.
Right. So, extra legal violence was enacted by white mobs, state police, and local deputies across Texas. The estimates of the dead range from 300 to several thousand. So, this was like a mass genocide. Mm-hmm.
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah.
And again, you mentioned deputies and stuff like that. Every time that I've found a connection with, policing here in America, like it always almost had something to do back then with them using them for racial purposes.
Oh, yeah.
Always, almost always.
Mm-hmm.
It's like they just used them for that reason.
Yeah, a lot of the perpetrators seem to be mostly law enforcement or just Anglo vigilantes.
Mm-hmm.
So, police often colluded with the vigilante mobs, and Mexican Americans were tortured, hanged, shot, beat, and buried alive. So, many of the known victims were adult men, though a few women and some children were murdered by the white mobs. So, the executions often occurred in isolated and rural areas hidden from public view. Assailants almost never faced arrest, and grand juries refused to indict the accused, as in the cause of the Prevenir massacre. So Mexican Americans had no option but to organize their lives and avoid law enforcement or the white community. So, yeah, so it got to a point where...
But we're supposed to be proud, Nate, that we live in a free country.
And we're supposed to back the blue?
Yeah, we're supposed to back the blue.
Yeah. Despite the justice system saying we don't want to help you at all. And then we're like, well, we have no choice but to just remove ourselves from the equation to protect ourselves. And then we have to completely avoid any law enforcement, like, at all, or any white people, like, at all. In order to, like, avoid getting brutally killed and tortured. So, the nativism, which had been growing in the United States for several decades, grew even stronger in the aftermath of the Mexican Revolution. In January 1917, the United States passed the Immigration Act of 1917, and this legislation severely curtailed the immigration to the United States and marked a major turning point in the U.S. immigration policy. The act introduced a literary requirement, increased the head tax to $8, which, let me see how much that is right now. So what was it, $8? What year was this, 1917?
1917.
8 USD, 1917 to 2021. Okay, which is $170. $170 per person.
And that's like upon entry or what? That they have to pay that?
It's just called the head tax. I believe that's what that is. So added new prohibited categories, including peoples with mental illness, as well as the gender inverse, which is what they used to call the LGBT community.
LGBTQ community. So just so y'all know, LGBTQ people have existed forever.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Oh, yeah.
It's not a new trend.
Yeah, they didn't just, like, appear out of nowhere 20 years ago. They've been here for forever.
It's in nature as well. Gayness is in nature. Like, it's a thing.
Oh, yeah.
It's natural.
Mm-hmm. Like, multiple animal species that are not humans are gay.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So let me see what else. Okay, so and extended the Chinese Exclusion Act to bar all Asian immigrants except from Japan and the Philippines. So this act created a burden for Mexican immigrants as the literary requirements, head taxes, and restricted categories were applied vigorously. In 1917, the U.S. Public Health Service also implemented invasive medical inspections at the border, where men and boys would be stripped naked and examined for a defective anatomy,
Huh?
which includes having too big boobs, their boobs are too big, or their weenies were too small.
Wait, the men?
I think it also applies to the women.
So would they strip the women too?
Possibly. I think also, and maybe the breast thing might also apply to the men if they were too
Yeah, so
overweight.
I don't know.
So, and they were also sprayed with chemical agents to be disinfected.
My God.
Mm-hmm. Outrage.
From what?
Disinfected from being Mexican, I guess.
I was about to say it made sense if there was maybe like a virus or something going on at that time, or something that they actually would have to like be disinfecting for, but they just disinfected.
Yeah. So imagine being like determined whether it was like, oh, your weenie's too small, you can't be American.
Yeah, it'd be like, this is my body. What the fuck? I was born this way.
So outrage at the prosecutors. At the
I would have been like, let me see yours.
Let me see your weenie. And you'd be like, ma'am, are you coming on to me?
No, it'd be the men. That'd be like, if they're like, your weenie's too small, I'd be like, yeah, I bet you yours is smaller. Let me see.
Outrage at the procedurals resulted in the 1917 Bath Riots. So soon, agricultural interests in California and Texas successfully lobbied Secretary of Labor William B. Wilson to create exemptions for agricultural laborers. For all other immigrants from Mexico, the protocols remained in place. So you get to go past all this stuff if you were coming in to be a laborer for agriculture. So, with these new policies...
Again, you can work, but that's it.
Mm-hmm. With these new policies in place, nativists across the United States were emboldened to enact anti-Mexican violence. In one particularly infamous and egregious incident in Bisbee, Arizona, over 1,000 Mexican and Mexican-American laborers were forcibly deported by an army of over 2,000 deputies in an incident known as the Bisbee deportation. The laborers, who were miners in a nearby copper mine, had been organized by the Industrial Workers of the World, a labor union, in June 26, 1917. In response, Sheriff Harry Wheeler and his army of deputies rounded up, arrested over 1,000 of the men in July 12, 1917, marching them to a waiting train. The train carried the men to Columbus, New Mexico, where it left them in the desert without food or water. Their crime was unionizing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And they don't want that. And this was a sheriff who did this, a law enforcement
And again,
officer.
Just the use of police for shit like this.
Yeah. Then something happened.
It's funny how they don't see how that would continue on through the generations.
Yeah. So after this, something happened. Something major happened. Want to know what it was?
The World War.
Right. World War I. And the U.S.
Which I will say that during World War I, Mexico remained neutral. Yeah. Despite Germany trying to consistently gain them as an ally.
Oh, yeah. There was like this major letter that U.S. intercepted, which actually was one of the main reasons why we entered the war.
Why U.S. entered the war, because they're like, we're not gonna have Mexico beating us.
Yeah.
Or going against us, like.
So the U.S. involvement in World War I lasted from April 6, 1917, until the war's end in November 11, 1918. During this time, approximately 200,000 Hispanic Americans fought for the United States. So the majority of these Hispanic servicemen were Mexican Americans. Many of these men experienced discrimination in the service, and some went so far as to hide their Mexican ancestry to avoid presidential treatment.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. That must stink.
Fighting a war with people that don't even want you there.
Mm-hmm. So much so that you have to pretend to not be what you
Yourself.
are. Mm-hmm.
Yourself, yeah.
So unlike African American servicemen, however, Mexican Americans did not serve in segregated units during World War I, which I don't know if that's any better.
No.
Yeah. So
I mean, because they were still they were not segregated, so that forced them to be among the others who would constantly bully them and
yeah,
stuff like that. So
yeah, despite being on the same side in this major war. So even as white servicemen harassed the Mexican American soldiers for their barrio English, Mexican American soldiers proved decisive in several key skirmishes, including the Battle of San Miguel and Miscegenation offensive. So David B. Barclay, one Mexican-American man from Laredo, was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for scouting behind enemy lines in France. And Marceliano Serna, who immigrated to the United States from Mexico as a young man, was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. During the war, Serna single-handedly destroyed a German machine gun site with one battle. 2 weeks later, he took out 26 enemy soldiers, captured 26 more as prisoners, and successfully prevented his fellow American soldiers from executing the captured men. So, yeah.
Where would y'all have been without them?
So Serna returned to the United States as the most decorated officer from the state of Texas.
And he was
Mexican. He was Mexican American. And that's where we'll end it for today.
Oh, shoot.
Yeah. Really? You wanted to hear more?
It was getting good. It's the World War I and World War II.
Yeah. So that was the end of World War II.
And then we're going to go into the Depression.
Yeah. So next time we're going to go into the 1920s, and then we'll go into the Great Depression, and then we'll go into World War II. So that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be talking about finally going to be talking about the rise of the KKK, the Johnson-Reed Act, Hollywood, and Mexicans' roles in Hollywood, LULAC, and stuff like that. So we're going to be talking about that in next episode. So a little recap. What do you think about everything we just talked about today?
I feel like it's very apparent that the U.S. and people from the U.S. are only okay when the minorities are very much below them. They're just the working class. They're just the workers. And that's when the only times that they feel comfortable. Mm-hmm. They don't want them to have any rights. They barely even probably like that the Mexicans have citizenship, even though they don't even recognize that. They don't even recognize them as citizens. So yeah, I think that it's very, very unfair. There's a lot of, like you said, hypocrisy and double standards.
Right.
It's not right. It's not right.
Right. And they seem to, the Anglo-Americans at least, seem to be very adamant into keeping the status quo.
Right. Like they're doing all these things that are, they're against civil rights. Like the whole sterilization thing, like that's, no.
Yeah, and then the Nazis based off of their laws off of that.
Right, exactly. Mm-hmm. So that right there just speaks volumes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then have you ever seen this commercial? It was this I think it was an anti-smoking commercial where it was this teenager, And this dad has like this confrontation, and he's all like, "Did you?" And he finds like his secret stash of cigarettes. The father finds his son's secret stash of cigarettes, and he's all like, "Where did you learn how to smoke this stuff?" And then the kid turns into him, and is like, "I learned it from you." And then the dad turns like, "Oh," and then it's like that. That was the end of the PSA. That kind of reminds me of that.
No, I didn't see it.
Huh?
What reminds you of that?
The dad as the Americans and the teenager as the Nazis. When he's all like, where did you learn this stuff? And then he's like, "I learned it from you."
From you. Yeah.
And then it goes like, and that was the end.
I heard that the Nazis use what plans they had when the founding fathers first came over, and they tried to eradicate the Native Americans as well.
Oh.
It was something like that as well that the Nazis used, that the U.S. had done first.
Right. So yeah, there's more to history than just black and white, you can say. And then
there's a lot. That's why we're doing the whole 360.
Yeah, and then we have politicians who are like, "We don't want to teach this in schools," and that's why we're here. So,
doing the Lord's work.
And so what I noticed is that a lot of the instigators of these massive counter revolutions were law enforcement. Some of these were completely unprovoked, like the like that incident in Arizona where they just arrested like 1,000 minors,
yeah, and just left them to go. And it's like, when you think about it, how would you feel like you have no like say, and you just literally are getting picked up from your job and being taken away, and you have no say? You don't have a way to call anybody back then. Like, it's just whatever these people decide to do to you. And it could just happen at any moment.
Yeah. And so, yeah, no wonder the Mexican American community decided to just cut themselves off from,
stay away.
Yeah, they're like, we just stay away from law enforcement as much as you can. And I heard
white people.
And I heard that was like a very like intense. It's like an actual conversation that parents have with their children, mostly in the African American community, where they have to have like this, like, necessary talk about law enforcement.
I know, right? And that's like the whole opposite of what law enforcement is supposed to be, right? They're supposed to make everyone, not just some people or certain people, but everyone. They're supposed to protect and serve everyone, and that's the guise that they're, operating under.
Right.
Public safety, something that they've always like disguised it as, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's really not.
We the people don't mean all the people, Ruby. So yeah, that was this episode of the 360. We talked about a lot of ground here today. We covered Juan Crow, the 1900s and the 1910s. And so next time, we're going to go into the other stuff, the 1920s, the Great Depression, and World War II, which should be also very, very interesting stuff. So we'll see as we climb along the 20th century. All right.
Yeah, we'll see you back in history class, guys.
Back to history class. All right. I've been Nathaniel Avila.
And I've been Ruby Rodriguez. You can call me Mrs. Rodriguez.
Okay, Mrs. Rodriguez. All right, and we'll talk to you guys next time. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to a Vision podcast, home of wacky talkies, the kingdom, evil exists, and many more.